When the first empire in history was founded, there was only one problem. It had money, it had taxes, it had an army, but it wasn't enough. The Akkadian Empire collapsed not because of its enemies, but because it discovered the limits of money. So why couldn't a production-dependent monetary system hold a vast empire together? Here's the truth. When a great empire was built for the first time in history, no one realized it was an experiment about money. The Akkadian Empire is usually told through its conquests, Sargon's military might, or its unification of Sumerian city-states. But what the Akkadians actually tested was this. What happens if money, taxes, and production are managed from a single center? And more importantly, how long can such a system last? In this story, money is not just a tool, it's the decisive factor. Because both the rise and the fall of the Akkadian Empire are about how money was used. When the Akkadians entered the scene, money already existed in Mesopotamia. But this money was not coins as we know it. The currency of daily life was barley. Workers' wages were paid in barley, taxes were collected in barley, and debts were calculated in barley. For larger and longer-term transactions, silver was used. Silver was valued by weight, calculated with standard measures like the shekel. This system was highly advanced for its time, but it had one crucial feature. Money was tightly tied to production. If there was production, there was money. If production fell, money vanished. This was its most fundamental difference from modern economies. There was no money that could be printed in a crisis. In the Sumerian city-states, this system was relatively balanced. The economy was local, and crises generally remained contained. But the Akkadians took this system and scaled it to an empire 10 times larger than the Sumerian lands. This was precisely the breaking point. With the Akkadian Empire, money was used on an imperial scale for the first time. Barley and silver were still there, but now they were not just economic instruments. They were the foundational pillars of state power. A regular tax system was established. Collected grain and silver accumulated in palace storehouses. These resources were channeled into the empire's biggest expense item, one of history's first standing salaried armies. This was a critical turning point, because from this moment on, money was directly converted into military power. The more taxes the state collected, the more soldiers it could feed. The more soldiers it fed, the more land it could control. Money had become the fuel of conquest. The army's annual salary reached 500,000 sila of barley. But this system had a hidden assumption: continuous and increasing production. Agriculture had to succeed every year. Trade could not falter. Trade, too, was tied to this centralized structure. The state began to control strategic raw materials like tin and copper. Merchants ceased to be free entrepreneurs and largely became extensions of the state, working on routes and prices dictated by decree. This brought order in the short term, but killed economic flexibility. Pressure mounted in the countryside. Peasants were both producers and taxpayers. Even when yields fell, tax demands did not change. This increased debt. One tablet records that a farmer named Nursin, after a dry year, owed 30 sila of barley to the temple and had to pledge his family as collateral. Debts were recorded in barley and silver, but when there was no produce left to pay, these debts turned into social ruin. Then nature intervened. Prolonged droughts seriously reduced agricultural output. At this point, money's tight link to production became a deadly trap. As production began to collapse, money lost its function. The state's grain reserves dwindled, tax revenues dropped, and feeding the army became difficult. The tax pressure was not eased. On the contrary, the state tried to compensate for the loss of income. This increased social unrest. Revolts broke out, central authority weakened, and trade routes were disrupted. When the flow of money stopped, the empire stopped too. The collapse of the Akkadian Empire did not happen overnight. It was the slow revelation of the limits of money. A production-dependent, inflexible, centralized monetary system could not sustain a great empire. Money had built the state, but it had also made it fragile. The Akkadians essentially discovered what we today call a liquidity trap. They just didn't have a name for it. While modern central banks try to escape this trap by printing money, their only chance was to wait for rain. Looking back today, the Akkadians tell us this: money alone is not power. If money is not in harmony with production, distribution, and society's carrying capacity, it can bring down even the strongest states. The Akkadians were the first to experience this in history, but unfortunately, they were not the last. What do you think was the Akkadians' biggest mistake? Did they manage the economy too rigidly to allow any flexibility, or did they simply fail to account for nature's ability to throw a crisis? I'm curious to hear your thoughts in the comments.